Hello and welcome. You're tuned into the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Today, we're going to talk about something that's been in the news a lot lately. There have been stories coming out from very credible, reliable sources regarding UFO technology, the secret organizations and government groups that are investigating these claims, and it has really grabbed the attention of the world. And I know many of the listeners have been reaching out saying, Dave, we need to talk about this. Let's get somebody on the show. Well, as luck would have it, I've got two someones that are going to be on the show with me today. Their new book, The Day the Earth Stands Still. They're here to chat with us about it. Derek Gilbert hosts Skywatch TV, which is a Christian television program that airs on several national networks, and co-hosts Sci Friday, a weekly television program that analyzes science news with his wife, author Sharon K. Gilbert. And Derek is the author of the best-selling book, The Great Inception, Satan's Psyops from Eden to Armageddon. Joining us also, Josh Peck is an avid researcher of fringe topics, works in full-time ministry at Skywatch TV, hosts Into the Multiverse, and has authored numerous books, including Unraveling the Multiverse and Abandon Ascending. We are here talking about this news that's going on in the world, talking a little bit about your book and kind of opening our minds to this. Guys, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Well, thanks for having us on, and it's good to talk to you again, Dave.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And Josh, everybody really loved you in the TV show Drake and Josh. I got a lot of emails after the last episode.
Yeah, I bet. I get a lot of those, too.
Yeah, it was funny. I was talking to you guys off air, and I mentioned that I thought it was like just within the last year that we had you on the show. You informed me it was a few years ago, but I still get emails from people asking if you were the kid from Drake and Josh. So just kind of a funny little situation. But let's start, Derek, if you don't mind. We'll begin with you, and since we've had Josh on, and then we'll remind our listeners about who he is, not the kid from Drake and Josh. But Derek, talk to me a little bit about your background, if you don't mind.
Sure. Got started in broadcasting when I was in college, so which Josh likes to remind me, my broadcasting career began before he was born. So, but
every chance I get.
Yes. So that was the career path that I pursued for about the first 10 or 12 years out of college. Realized that moving around every couple of years after our daughter was born wasn't a great way to raise a family, so I got out of that, wound up in steel sales for the better part of 20 years. But when podcasting came out, and actually backing up a step, I've always had an interest in the paranormal, but always approached it from like a sci-fi direction. Josh kind of approaches it, and he will tell you, approached it from more of a new age direction. But still with an interest, I guess, in what those strange lights in the sky were. I always kind of envisioned the future as being like what we saw every week on Star Trek, which, Josh, I am old enough to remember seeing when it was out in its first run. So the broadcasting career in the mid-'90s shifted to a sales career. Got divorced, remarried. My current wife, Sharon, is we're now, in fact, within a week of our 20th anniversary, so that's worked out well.
Oh, congratulations. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, she like me shares a love of science fiction. I found a woman who actually likes sci-fi more than chick flicks. And about 15 years ago now, we began to write. She's always been a writer. I told her that I couldn't write. I was not a writer. I appreciated those who could do it, but that was not me. Well, she challenged me to try it. We actually entered an annual challenge in the month of November. It's an annual thing called National Novel Writing Month, where you're challenged to write 50,000 words in the span of a month. She actually did it that first year, and I think it was 2002, wrote a novel, actually got it, found a publisher for it, and then we wound up writing several novels and pitching them the idea of writing individually, but in the same fictional world. So we were sharing characters and plot lines and things back and forth.
Well, that's nice. Not many women will let you ride their coattails like that, Derek.
No, and I am happy to take that. My father pulled me aside once after he got to know her and said, "Hey, son, you married up." So, My dad was a wise man, so I listened to him. Anyway, we began podcasting in 2005 as a way to try to market our novels on a shoestring. This was just, less than a year after Adam Curry and Dave Weiner came up with the code, the XML code for podcasting. So we were early adopters. Our podcast was called PID Radio, Peering into Darkness Radio. And we found out since 2005 that actually this was God's way of getting us to begin podcasting. The writing led to the podcasting, which is what led to what we're doing now with Skywatch TV, which is now circled back around and led to us actually doing a lot of writing.
That's pretty fascinating to me. First of all, you and I traversed kind of the same pathway. I started with college radio back in '88 and did that for a few years, fell in love with it, but then went into the world of sales, much like you, and then didn't get back into this till 2006. So I feel you on that journey. It's, jumping in and out and doing those type of things. Now I'm intrigued by this. And first of all, listeners, just stay open-minded to what we're going to discuss today, because part of why I'm so fascinated by having both of you on here is you're a Christian television program dealing with something that most Christians and religious people will deny exists and say that this is trickery of the devil. This is nothing more than, the devil trying to confuse us and make us question God and our place in the universe. We are supposed to be the only race that God created. And, that's been kind of the theory and belief for many years. How are you able to marry the idea behind some of these sci-fi topics and UFOs with an alien disclosure, I guess, with the Christianity angle and not irritate a lot of people doing so?
Well, that's one of the things that we wanted specifically to address with this book. And, Josh did a lot of work on the theology of in the book. I did a lot of the history of the theology of the modern UFO movement, the official disclosure movement, and specifically the ancient aliens hypothesis, the ancient aliens theory, but we definitely wanted to address the question of whether Christianity, properly understood, could accommodate an actual extraterrestrial presence on Earth. Now, that's not to say we believe there is. We don't. We don't believe that there is any credible physical evidence ever that we have been visited by an extraterrestrial entity. That's not to say that but the phenomenon is real. And that's why the approach of churches...
Wait a minute. So you don't believe it's happened, but the phenomenon is real.
The phenomenon is real. It's just not what people in the movement believe it is. And
okay.
And you are correct, Dave, that I think most churches, when they're presented with this question, what is this going on here? We're approaching the 10-year anniversary of the Stephenville UFO flap down in Texas. And most churches just totally ignored it, even though it was witnessed by hundreds of people, made the news all over Texas, nationwide, in fact. And yet most churches didn't want to deal with it. Our friend L.A. Marzulli volunteered, contacted churches down in that area and said, look, I will come down on my own dime to address this from a Christian perspective. He didn't get one taker. But people will believe what they see with their own eyes, even if what they're seeing is a deception. Sadly, if their churches, their pastors, their priests aren't giving them answers, the New Age movement and the UFO movement, and there's a significant overlap there, are more than happy to give them answers to those questions. That's why and we start out the book with this information to make it clear why we are addressing this topic. 5 years ago, National Geographic did a survey of what Americans believed about UFOs. This was to promote a new program that they were launching, Alien Chasers or something like that, and found that 36% of American adults believe that we're being visited by extraterrestrials. I mean, that's hardly a fringe topic. More than a third of American adults believe we are being visited by extraterrestrials. But when a respected survey group, the Barna Group, which does a lot of research into what American Christians believe and how closely it tracks with what they say they believe, they found, the Barna Group, that only 10% of American adults have a biblical worldview. And that, as they define it, means holding 6 key basic tenets of the Christian faith, such as Jesus lived a sinless life, was born of a virgin, Satan is a literal entity and not just a concept or a symbol, that sort of thing. It should be Christianity 101. But even among evangelical Christians, people who self-identify as born-again Christians, only 19% have a biblical worldview. So when you compare those numbers, 36% believe ET is real, 10% biblical worldview, there are more people in America who believe in ET than believe in the God of the Bible, and that's why we are addressing the topic. And again, Josh did a lot of heavy lifting when it came to the theology of how Christianity would or should react. Let me put it that way. How Christians should react if, say, Klaatu lands on the White House lawn.
Yeah, and because, a lot of Christians, I think, are under the assumption, because I was even taught this, but they're under the assumption that you can either believe in God or you can believe in ET, and there's no room for both.
Well, let me ask you this then, Josh, if you don't mind. A few years ago, when the new Pope took over, for Classic Pope, which I remember we all loved when it hit the shelves, there was this flap that he talked about the fact that, hey, it's not really a sin to believe that there's life on other planets anymore. Now, is this an urban legend or is this fact? Did the Pope come out and make that comment? And if so, what do you make of that information then? Does that mean that we should be open to that concept?
I'm not sure if he said it or not. Personally, I'm not a Catholic. I don't really follow the Pope or the Catholic Church. I'm not opposed to it. Just I'm an evangelical, but I do agree with the statement. It's not sinful to believe that there's life on other planets, and a lot of Christians would have a hard time with that. And kind of going back to your original question, I think we do kind of irritate some Christians sometimes with that. But there's good solid theology on why. If you ask most Christians, like, okay, if life on other planets isn't possible, then why is that? And you'll get a couple different answers. Usually it's because the Bible doesn't talk about them, or it's they'll say, well, the church never believed in aliens, or they'll say because we're made in the image of God. And these are all kind of they're not real theological problems. Actually, Dr. Michael Heiser did a lot of work into this that I drew on for this book. And just to give some history of this question, it's actually a really old question in the church and in the secular world. So in ancient history, the major opponents to the idea of life on other worlds were Plato and Aristotle. They were against the idea because they had a geocentric cosmology view. But later on, over time, questions started to be asked. If God is all powerful, then why was he only able to create one world? Questions like that started to be asked. And if only one world existed, then how could God possibly be, truly infinite and omnipotent? So the theologian Thomas Aquinas expressed his ideas on how to solve that problem, and he said that God had the power to create infinite worlds, but all the matter in the universe had been used to construct Earth. Just modern science tells us that that's not correct. So going a little bit further, in 1277, Etienne Tempier, who was the bishop of Paris, issued a condemnation of doctrines which seemed to set limits on God's omnipotence under authority of the Pope. So this is a little bit of Catholic history, but one of the propositions condemned was the first cause, or God, cannot make many worlds. And that, this didn't mean the church began teaching about life on other planets, or what at that time they called it plurality of worlds, but the physics of Aristotle were still popular until right around the 16th century, which taught that if any worlds did exist, they would have to gravitate to the center of the universe. So it was believed Earth was located there in the center. I'm
curious what your thoughts are on this. If we look at kind of the theology and belief system behind Christianity and other religions, and the reason that there may not, although you talk to a lot of people, will tell you that there are definitely UFO references throughout the Bible, and they've made some pretty compelling arguments with some of the ways the translations are made. But I'm curious, even in the Bible, Jesus says, hey, stop worrying about your future. Stop worrying about what comes next. Focus on here and now. Couldn't that just be the same deal that, yes, there's no mention truly uncloaked or unveiled messages that there's life on other planets, but that's because the God wanted us to just focus on the life here. making the best of life here and not concerning ourselves with the affairs of other planets and other realms and other beliefs. I wonder if that might make more sense to why there is no official nod in the Bible. Because again, it seems silly to me that if you believe in God and the universe is so infinite and huge and ever expanding, that an artisan would stop with one planet full of monkeys and not create more life and see, well, you know, I kind of messed that one up. Let's see what the Beatles look like blonde, right?
And, you know, the whole idea, well, the Bible doesn't say so, so it can't be true. I mean, that's so easily refuted. You know, there's a lot of things. The Bible doesn't talk about the internet or toilet paper, or there's a lot of things that the Bible doesn't talk about that exist. So, you know, making an argument from silence and saying that, you know, aliens on other worlds can't exist because, you know, the Bible doesn't talk about them. I mean, it just falls flat. It's a very weak argument. But a lot of this sprung from the idea of evolution, because, you know, Christians were, you know, later on, were faced with, you know, okay, well, if we accept aliens, then we have to accept evolution. And, you know, even today, a lot of Christians are hostile to the idea of evolution, but, you know, especially even earlier, which again, it wouldn't have to mean that. It would just, you know, I mean, there's a lot of ways that some Christians do think about this. Christians who accept evolution as a possible means of creation, they would say, well, even if ET did evolve on another planet, you know, God still spurred on the process like he did here. And then for those who don't accept evolution, then they would say, well, God could have created life out there. You don't need evolution for that. So there's also this supposed threat to the inerrancy of the Bible. You know, since the Bible doesn't teach, you know, aliens, wouldn't that prove the Bible to be false? And, you know, of course, it doesn't, like we said. So this question came up. I think it was Thomas Paine who originally brought this up, the incarnation and redemption question. You know, if there are other planets out there with other, you know, beings, other conscious, intelligent beings, wouldn't Jesus have to be born and die and you know, the sacrifice for their sins? You know, all the stuff that happened on Earth, wouldn't it have to happen on other planets too? And that usually comes up because of Romans 8 and Revelation 21:22 that tells us the atonement of Christ ultimately extends throughout the entire universe. Scripture teaches everything will be recreated, you know, to be like Eden before the fall of man, and it would stand to reason that extraterrestrial life, whether intelligent or not, if it exists, would also be included, you know, similar to animals. You know, there was no bear or cat Christ. You know, it was only for humanity. Yet we still see when everything is restored, animals have a role in that redemptive process. So then ultimately what it all comes down to is what is the image of God? Because most Christians think, well, and this is true, that humans are created in the image of God. So that kind of excludes the idea of aliens. But when you ask many Christians what is the image of God, what does it mean to be created in the image of God, a lot of times they have the wrong idea about that. And when we have the right idea, Christianity actually could sustain an extraterrestrial reality really easily. Humanity would still maintain the uniqueness of being created in the image of God. So we get that from Genesis. Let's see, verse 26 here. Then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Let him have dominion over the fish in the sea, the birds of the heavens, over the livestock, over all the earth, so on and so forth. And that's Genesis 1:26 through 28 that talks about that. So it's common and has been for centuries to define the image of God as something to do with intelligence or communication ability or possession of a spirit or soul, conscious, free will, abstract thought, so some combination of those attributes. That's usually, and even today, that's usually what Christians will say the image of God is. Through biblical clarification, though, the image of God is actually none of those things. And the reason for this is the image is what makes mankind distinguishably unique in relation to any other created thing in the universe. So Dr. Michael Heiser did a lot of work on this in his book, The Unseen Realm, and he brought out 4 points to this. He said that the image of God as described in the Bible, has to be these four things. First, both men and women are included in this. So it's not just for men, it's men and women. Two, the divine image bearing is what makes humankind distinct from the rest of earthly creation, so plants and animals. And the text of Genesis 1:26 does not inform us that divine image bearing makes us distinct from heavenly beings. Those sons of God who were already in existence at the time of creation, the plurals in Genesis 1:26 mean that in some way we share something with them when it comes to bearing God's image. Three, there is something about the image that makes humankind like God in some way. Four, there is nothing in the text to suggest that the image has been or can be bestowed incrementally or partially. You're either created as God's image bearer or you aren't. So one cannot speak of being partly or potentially bearing God's image. So this tells us that the image of God has to be something possessed in its entirety by every human being, regardless of physical or mental development. So right on from conception until death. So the conditions that Dr. Heiser listed out are mandated by what Genesis 1:26 says about the image, but there's other verses that talk about it too. Genesis 5:1 says, this is the written account of Adam's line. When God created humankind, he made him in the likeness of God. Genesis 9:6 mirrors that message as well. So if we think of humankind as image bearers rather than the image being an attribute, then these things begin to make sense. So, humans are representations of God on earth. We're to represent him on earth and take care of it in the way that he would if he were here, physically and bodily. This is why murder, for example, is such a grave offense. When somebody kills another human being, he's essentially killing God in effigy. So the image is what humans are, not what humans have. So this is why extraterrestrials, if they exist, they wouldn't be considered as being created in the image of God. They aren't human. They weren't put in charge of the earth in the way humans are. Maybe they're in charge of their own planet, but that would be something separate.
Well, where do they come from then? I mean, here's the idea that if they're not created by our God, they're not created.
Well, they still would be. They still would be. I mean, they just wouldn't be in charge of Earth in the way that we are. Like I said, God might have created them as, to be in charge of their own planet, whatever that might be.
How do we know, though? How do we know that in time that they're not the actual terrestrials and we're the extraterrestrials on this planet? There's some strange history and weirdness about what goes on here. I often wonder if these USOs, the unidentified submersible objects, and the reason that they're always zipping around here is not because they're coming from a great distance. They're here. They're hiding within our realm around us at all times, and they've just escalated past where we were.
Well, there's the distinction, and Derek will probably be able to cover this more. But when we talk about the UFO and alien abduction phenomena, we're talking about something separate from the idea of extraterrestrials. Personally, we believe that the USOs, and we do believe that that's all real. We just don't think they're extraterrestrial in nature. We think those are more extra dimensional. I'll let Derek take that one.
Well, it's basically following the evidence where it leads. One of the things that we found in researching the book is that there's an awful lot of, let me rephrase that. There is a desperate need for more critical thinking when it comes to analyzing the accounts of unidentified flying objects. The same holds true with a lot of what is considered megalithic archaeology, for example. And we can't lift this stone today, so therefore it must have been supernatural, or must have been aliens, or it must have been, Nephilim or giants or something. That's not necessarily the case. Just because we can't identify what a particular craft is in the sky or lights in the sky doesn't mean that it is necessarily coming from outside the solar system. When you look at the scientific, the physical problems with interstellar travel, interstellar radiation, the vast amount of energy required to move, across such distances, the speeds required, and the impact energy of hitting something even as small as the mass of a raisin where you're crossing interstellar space. There are some huge technical obstacles to getting across, from one solar system to another, and I think when we're looking at these craft, because if we can't explain it or file it in our minds as something that we recognize, so that doesn't look like a passenger plane, it doesn't look like a helicopter, it doesn't look like a hot air balloon, so it must be extraterrestrial. Well, why do we always jump to that conclusion? And I think it's because we've been conditioned and pushed that way, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit more. Pop culture has a profound impact on how we process information like that, how we process images and things that we see that way. But when you start really digging at the evidence, you find most of what are reported as unidentified flying objects are just misidentified natural phenomena, whether they're craft that could be secret government craft that the United States government doesn't want Russia or China to know about. The planet Venus, often misidentified as a craft. And I know there are people out there who are saying, oh, yeah, we hear this story. Okay, well, I get that. We're not saying that all sightings can be explained away as natural phenomena. That's not what we're saying at all. But what we are saying is when you start following the evidence and looking at how that small percentage, say, just to pick a rough guess, 10% of the sightings are truly something that cannot be explained by things that we can identify easily as a private or passenger aircraft, government aircraft of some type, or misidentified natural phenomena. That percentage of those sightings that cannot be explained by natural means, if they're violating what appears to be the law of physics, or if they appear to be violating the laws of physics, maybe it's because not because they're extraterrestrial, but because they are moving in and out of our dimension. And this was a conclusion that was reached by a number of secular researchers, highly respected secular researchers, like Jacques Vallée, J. Allen Hynek, the guy who developed the close encounters scale, close encounters of the first, second, third, fourth kind. John Mack, the Harvard psychologist John Keel, author of the Mothman Prophecy. They believed that the evidence was more likely pointing to an extra-dimensional presence rather than extraterrestrial. And when you start talking about extra-dimensional entities, well, now you're starting to talk the language of Christians, and that's why we wanted to write this book, because Christians, we need to be prepared to answer these questions. Again, there are more people believing in ET out there than believing the God of the Bible. Josh has, with his program, his weekly program on Skywatch TV, Into the Multiverse, done an excellent job of explaining how we, in our three spatial dimensions, might see something coming in from another dimension or from more dimensions, something that manifests in multiple dimensions that we can't perceive with our senses, how it might appear to us as though it's violating the laws of physics. By using the example of the, when was that book, Flatland, written, Josh? Was it 19th century?
Yeah, Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions. Yeah, it was like the end of the 1800s.
Right. I mean, and that's an example that we can perceive because we can visualize how a two-dimensional creature might view, say, a three-dimensional entity like you or me, putting our 5 fingers through a piece of paper as 5 separate objects that once our hand moves all the way into the piece of paper or through the piece of paper, suddenly coming together as one, and then drawing it back out again, then separating again, and then disappearing altogether. It would appear to be magical or supernatural to somebody in a with a two-dimensional perspective. Similarly, we with our three-dimensional perspective might see an extra-dimensional entity or an extra-dimensional craft of some kind manifesting in a similar way that violates the laws of physics. But again, just because it moves in a way that we cannot explain, we shouldn't jump to the conclusion that it's necessarily coming from another solar system.
We need to take a quick break. We'll be back. We've got so much more to discuss. This is the best in paranormal talk radio. You're listening to Beyond the Darkness.
Beyond the Darkness.
We're back. This is the best in paranormal talk radio. Beyond the Darkness is on the air. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Hey, I want to remind everybody that True Crime Tuesday, if you have not subscribed yet, you need to. We talk about some of the most fascinating and bizarre cases. Plus, you always get a nice healthy dose of dumb crimes and stupid criminals. How do I sign up? Well, where have you been living? In a cave? I've been telling you every week for the last year. It's real simple. Just go to darknessradio.com. Click on the True Crime Tuesday banner. And listen, it's a new year. You deserve the best. Give it, all you got to do is pay $5. That's all I'm telling you, folks. $5 and you get 4 brand new episodes every month, 90 to 120 minutes long of some of the most compelling true crime stories from the people that lived it, experiencers, and we also talked to some of the police officers, attorneys, and reporters that were there on site during these crimes. So it's an amazing show. I hope that you'll check it out for yourself. Go sign up if you haven't done it yet. Try it out for a month. $5, that's all it is. You can end it after a month, but that'll give you access to all the brand new episodes plus all of our archives that are on the site for the last year. So go check it out for yourself, darknessradio.com. And then click on the True Crime Tuesday banner. And if you like the guests that we have on the show and you want to pick up their books, you want to pick up the projects and items that they have available, we've got them in one place for you. Just go to darknessradio.com. Click on the Killer Deals link. It'll take you right into our Amazon page where you can find today's guest's book, The Day the Earth Stands Still. Joining us right now, Derek Gilbert and Josh Peck are here talking about all that's going on in their research with this. And guys, it's been pretty explosive in the last month with people coming forward, former government employees and astronauts and pilots that have been talking about disclosure and that something is going on and that there are these programs that are working to try to understand this. Is that any surprise to you that things are starting to loosen up?
It's kind of funny. It's yes and no. I mean, this book, our book came out maybe a month or two before all this stuff started coming out.
Oh, not even, Josh. It was a week.
Yeah, that's true. So we probably finished the book then maybe a month or two before.
Right.
Because then time for printing and everything. But yeah, so our book was released and then a week later, we started seeing all these things, and we talked about it in the book, which was strange because I don't usually like to do predictions and stuff like that in what I write because it's so easy for things to just not happen. But I speculated, me and Derek both speculated in the book, and something that I talked about is like what might come in the very, very near future, maybe even before the end of 2017, and I talked about how I thought, just based on a lot of different things I was looking at, that I thought something, probably not official disclosure exactly, but something that would, at least a piece of it, or something that would kind of pave the way for more things later. Just something, I thought something was going to happen, that it wasn't going to be, mocked on the news and stuff, something that would be taken seriously. So some kind of revealing thing. And I didn't know what it was, but yeah, so when this came out, that all of a sudden you wake up one morning, you turn on the news, and they're talking about how the Pentagon at one point apparently had a secret research program into UFOs and all this stuff. And the most surprising part about it is the people delivering the news weren't laughing about it. They were taking it seriously. How often do we see that,
Right, or you hear in the background as they're telling the story all tongue-in-cheek. It is pretty impressive that suddenly everyone is taking this a little bit more seriously.
Yeah, and the thing that surprised us, well, I think here's the question. When we start looking at the people involved in the disclosure itself and the people involved in the program that was being run by the Department of Defense. I mean, the United States government has been investigating reports of unidentified craft for a long time. And frankly, as an American, I'm glad that they do, because some of those craft are secret planes being operated by the Russians and the Chinese and other countries that aren't necessarily friendly. So I'm okay with that. And anyone who's been And I certainly don't consider myself an expert or a ufologist. It's been an interest of mine, but I've got a lot of interests. I'm not a specialist in this particular field. But those who have followed this for a long time are aware of Air Force projects like, Project Blue Book, which, again, J. Allen Hynek was connected to. This project that we're talking about ran between 2007 and 2012. It was begun at the request of Senator Harry Reid, the retired senator from Nevada. It appears that the money that he had allocated for the project was about $22 million, and a lot of it went to a buddy of his by the name of Robert Bigelow, whose name is well known in UFO circles. He's the owner of the Skinwalker Ranch and a gentleman who for a long time has been very interested in the UFO phenomenon. He is also a gentleman who's got connections and contracts for doing business with the United States government. And so some of this money that was being allocated to research these strange sightings in the sky were winding up basically in the pockets of a political supporter and a guy who donated to Senator Reid's political campaign. So it's a little bit of patronage there. But the thing that struck us as odd about the disclosure itself was that the gentleman who ran the program for the Department of Defense, a Defense Intelligence Agency official by the name of Luis Elizondo, resigned about 2 months before he went public, went to the New York Times with this information and with the video that many of your listeners have probably seen, Dave, of the Navy pilots confronting something they couldn't identify over the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
Elizondo resigned his post with the government to take a position as chief of global security, if I remember correctly, of a new organization called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, which is a for-profit organization being run by Tom DeLonge, the former lead singer of the band Blink-182. He's been a long time, he's had a long interest in UFOs and shows up in the WikiLeaks emails, which Josh went into in some detail in the book. The WikiLeaks emails or release of emails of John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign chair during the 2016 election, trying to get a meeting with Podesta, hopefully to get some government backing for his new venture, which includes a number of other members, and this is not coincidental, we don't think, of guys who are coming right out of the intelligence community. These are guys who have had a long history of involvement in the UFO phenomenon, investigating it, helping to shape the narrative, and we spend a chapter on the involvement of the intelligence community in the modern UFO phenomenon since 1947. Again, we don't think it's a coincidence that you've got guys like Hal Puthoff, Elizondo, the former program director for Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works, another former CIA official, all on the board of directors of To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, which has a stated goal of producing content both for education and entertainment, and presumably promoting the idea that Earth is being visited by extraterrestrials. So the question is, what are these guys actually doing? Are they just capitalizing on their professional experience to make some money in the private sector? Well, okay. I'm okay with that. These guys worked hard, put in a long career, learned a lot of stuff. If they can take it and launch a new venture and make a few bucks creating entertaining movies, because as Josh pointed out in our last interview, goodness knows there aren't enough Hollywood movies that feature space aliens. So we always got room for more of those.
Yes. But they do seem to show a certain pattern with them every time, right? Whether it's making us question our theology, our belief systems, or our place in the universe.
Exactly right. And that's the other part of that's the other question that we have to ask. Is it more than just these guys are capitalizing on their life's experience to launch a new venture, or are they trying to shape our perception of this phenomenon for a particular reason? And it could be for a couple of reasons. It could just be that, again, these guys coming out of the intelligence community are still part of the intelligence community and still wanting to shape the UFO phenomenon and direct public attention toward the existence of extraterrestrials rather than thinking, gee, maybe those strange lights in the sky, in Senator Reid's home state of Nevada, which is where Area 51 is located, are a new project at Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works that we don't want the Russians and Chinese to know about. Maybe they would rather have us thinking that these strange lights in the sky are actually coming from Zeta Reticuli. In fact, we didn't delve deeply into the Roswell phenomenon in the book, but researchers such as Nick Redfern, Norio Hayakawa, and others who've done a lot of research on the ground there have come to the conclusion that something certainly happened in 1947 around Roswell, New Mexico, but it almost certainly was not of extraterrestrial origin. It was probably a government project that we didn't want Russia to know about, or the American public to know about, if the theory that former Nazi scientists were involved in this project at Roswell, admitting to the American public that we were paying scientists who'd been involved with Hitler's, war machine, and they were now on the American taxpayers' payroll. That would not have gone over very well. So floating the story that we were suddenly being visited by little green men was more desirable to the government than the true story, which was that, again, it was some sort of government project that they wanted to keep secret. So, again, what is really going on with this new disclosure that the New York Times put out there? For one, it's a for-profit venture. They raised over a couple of $1 million in funding to do whatever it is they're going to do. Why are they doing it? Could just be to, create a new company and make money on their own. It could be because of all of the intelligence community guys as part of this company. It could be that they're trying to shape the narrative and keep it going in this direction to continue to feed the belief that we are being visited by extraterrestrial, and that the government is just one of these days is going to finally tell us what they know.
What are you guys' take on the fact? I mean, it sounds like you have your feet pretty firmly planted on one side of this agenda, and why couldn't it just be that there is really something happening, and that there is some? I mean, right now we say, listen, propulsion and traversing the universe, that's something that we just don't have the capability to do. Well, I can go into the wilds of Africa, and those people would think that my cell phone is black magic, right? And It doesn't mean that greater technology can't exist just because we haven't seen it yet. If these creatures are out there and they're making themselves known, it just seems that there's been a lot of eyewitnesses through the years, a lot of people that are reluctant to come forward to share these stories because they're afraid of being ridiculed, and aren't in it for any kind of monetary gain. You certainly have your people out there that are in it to cash in it as well, but there are a lot of people that have come forward begrudgingly to share some stories because they feel it's important for the world to know. Couldn't it just be that religion is burying the idea because they don't have answers to give about our place in the universe if there is in fact other aliens? And does that make us, does that make God insignificant or a fantasy at that point?
To some Christians, that's the fear. To some Christians, that's the fear. To us, the way that we handled the book is we explore both sides of the issue, and there is, we're both totally willing to admit there is a ton of mystery around this. And you actually brought up a really good point.
Wait, I did? Let me know what it was. I'm in a bit of a fevered haze right now fighting the flu, and I am not sure what I just said, but let me hear what was a good point.
Well, like you said, you had a really good point in asking the question, couldn't it be, extraterrestrials and technology? And I'm not going to give you the typical Christian answer because I'm sick of the typical Christian answer. I think it's dishonest and lazy. The typical Christian answer is no, because God, or no, because the Bible doesn't say that. I think that is such a lazy answer, and it does a discredit to Christianity. And when really what it is, well, Dave, that is possible. Now, is it probable? And so in the book, Derek and I go through the actual evidence. And, we already established before earlier in the show, if there are extraterrestrials, even if extraterrestrials visit us, that doesn't really change or shake our faith in any in any way. I mean, if
Right.
anything, it would just kind of show that God's creation is a lot more expansive than we might have thought. But it's not a threat to our faith at all. I actually think it would be really cool. I think that'd be really interesting if it turns out that extraterrestrials are true, and if they are visiting us in some capacity. So we looked at all the evidence, and it's just, in being honest researchers, we got to go to where the evidence, and clearly there is something strange going on, and the again, like Derek brought up, the parts of it that are so weird that can't be explained by any natural means or anything that we know about today, all the time it always goes back into the extra dimensional stuff. And so to us, well, to me that's actually like really that's way more interesting. But I'm into quantum physics and I like that stuff anyway. But but actually the question of official disclosure is actually an ancient one. So. And ancient aliens have even picked up on this. That show had picked up on this. That the Earth has been visited by something, at least, for a really, really, really long time. And there's a lot of logical questions that come up. If it was just ET, if it was just extraterrestrials, why aren't they showing themselves? Or it's funny. A lot of the questions that atheists have about God. These questions comes up about ET, and to us it says it's more of a spiritual question at that point. Derek's done a ton of way more research than I have, and talks a lot in the book about the actual ancient history of this question. That goes even further more into why can't it be ET, but why is it less probable that it's ET rather than something extra dimensional or something like that? I'll let Derek explain that.
Well, one of the things I wanted to jump in and say, Josh, in response to your question, Dave, is that it is the evidence reported by contactees and abductees that leads us to believe that this is an extra dimensional phenomenon rather than an extraterrestrial phenomenon.
And we do believe the contactees' reports. We do believe them. My wife actually saw a UFO, and I totally believe her. Like we don't shut anybody down or go into it thinking that people are inherently lying or anything.
Right, absolutely. Because Josh answered the question exactly the way I would have. Why couldn't it be, or is it possible that? Well, yeah, absolutely, it's possible that. So let's look and follow the evidence exactly where the evidence leads. The thing that I find curious, and I will just put this out there, well, no, I'll save that for the end. When we start looking at the accounts of contactees and abductees, and we find that they are very often mutually contradictory, that these entities that have contacted people here on Earth, and it seems that more often than not, the contact is telepathic rather than through some physical means that can be verified. I mean, ET never seems to pick up the phone and dial or use a webcam. They are contacting experiencers and abducting people in ways that leave very little evidence. And by saying, well, that's just proof of their superior technology. Well, okay, but now you're using the same kind of argument that Christians get criticized for when they respond in similar fashion. Well, you just have to have faith. I know it happened to me. I know, my heart was changed when I accepted Jesus Christ. And so you just have to believe it based on my experience. If we're going to be honest, and that kind of evidence isn't going to sway a skeptic, then that same kind of evidence should not be persuasive when it's coming from a contactee or abductee either. Now, again, we're not saying that the experience isn't happening. What we're saying is verify what the entities are saying. How do we know that they're coming from Zeta Reticuli? How do we know that when we look at the accounts over the years and we see that as we learned more about the other planets in our solar system, the origin points for the aliens that were contacting us in the 50s, which were, then Venus and Mars, began moving further and further away. Once we realized, well, there's nothing that can live on Venus. The planet's temperature is 800 degrees and the pressure is crushing, so nothing can live there. Okay, Neptune. Now they're coming from another. Well, we've gotten to the point now where we know enough about the other bodies in our solar system to realize that life as we know it, really can't exist on any of the planets in the solar system, at least not intelligent life with the capability to build a craft to get here. So now the UFO community, the secular UFO community, is looking at the extra-dimensional hypothesis. And this is something that came out in the WikiLeaks emails where the late astronaut Dr. George Mitchell was...
Edgar Mitchell.
Edgar Mitchell. George Mitchell was the senator from Maine. Right, thank you. Dr. Edgar Mitchell was talking about aliens from the contiguous universe. In other words, other dimensions that are parallel to ours, but perhaps not always perceived by us in this dimension. So the question is, what does the evidence suggest, and how do we verify? How do we verify what the contactees and abductees are being told by these entities? And when you get right down to it, there's really nothing that can be. And when you start looking at the way contactees and abductees are often treated by the UFO community, and for that I would recommend the book by Jack Brewer, The Greys Have Been Framed. Boy, you get a really disturbing picture of how people who, in many cases, are in need of counseling because they've endured some kind of trauma, not necessarily an extraterrestrial, probing them in a very invasive way, but some type of trauma. And oftentimes, when the UFO community encounters these folks, they encourage them rather than, not to get counseling and to get treatment or to find out what's going on, but they accept the story at face value because it's because of confirmation bias. It reinforces what I want to believe is true rather than checking it, verifying it, and in the case of people who've been traumatized by their experiences, getting them help. So again, Jack Brewer, The Greys Have Been Framed was an eye-opening read for me in the research for this book. But as we look at the modern ancient alien theory, which is now in its 12th season on a major cable network here in the United States, when we start digging into the history of that theory, we see that it comes right out of 19th century occult teachings of Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, who founded a religion that's still very active today, Theosophy.
Congratulations. That rolled right off your tongue. I think I might have dislocated my my bilabial fricative if I tried to say that.
Well, Dave, I'm a professional with over 35 years experience. This isn't something that amateurs should try at home. I've been practicing it for a couple hours, actually. Madame Blavatsky believed that humanity was on our fourth incarnation, the fourth race. And I'm certainly not an expert on theosophy, but her belief system was premised on the existence of earlier incarnations of humanity, root races that originated on lost continents, which were very popular in the 19th century. The lost continent of Atlantis, which still has people trying to find it today. The lost continent of Lemuria, which actually was named because a zoologist in the 1860s noticed that you could find certain fossils of small primates on Madagascar and on India that were nearly identical. And yet there's a lot of ocean between Madagascar and India if you look at a map. So he theorized that there must have been a lost continent that allowed these small little monkeys to cross from one to the other, hence Lemuria. It's the continent where the lemurs were able to get for.
Look at that. We learn something new on every episode.
Blavatsky believed that was the origin point for mankind. And that humanity's development had been guided through the centuries over the millennia by these masters of ascended wisdom who she was in contact with telepathically. And they were contacting her from somewhere out in the stars near the constellation Sirius. Well, you fast forward a couple of decades to the early 20th century, and the horror fiction author H.P. Lovecraft, who was an atheist, he believed himself a man of science. He didn't believe any of this mumbo-jumbo, this religious mumbo-jumbo, the Theosophists or, Aleister Crowley and the Ptolemists. But he was happy to use their stuff as raw material for his horror stories. He was the one who invented Cthulhu and the Cthulhu mythos, which inspired many other authors in the 30s and 40s. His work never really caught on in the United States. In the 20s, that we were still, looking for literature rather than pulp horror fiction. But in World War II, American GIs overseas were sent a lot of Lovecraft's work because it was easy to read, it was a quick read, and it kept their minds off of what they were doing, trying to fight Germans and so on. And because of that, the French discovered H.P. Lovecraft after World War II and translated his works. He developed a whole new audience. It inspired a whole new generation of authors. A couple of science fiction authors who published a magazine there wrote a book drawing on a lot of Lovecraft's themes, megalithic architecture, the secrets of the pyramids, lost gods who were dead but lay dreaming at the bottom of the ocean, and so on, and put it into a book called Morning of the Magicians, or some such title. About 1960 it was published in English, translated into English about 1963. Sold really well. But like anything in music or art or literature that sells really well, movies, suddenly a lot of copies spring up. Hey, that did great. Let's see if we can make one just like that. Well, a hotel operator, manager in Switzerland in 1970 wrote a book on the same themes, megalithic architecture, the Nazca lines, and so on, little out of place artifacts that we can't explain, and blamed it all on ancient astronauts. And this hotel manager from Switzerland in 1970 wrote what became the best-selling book of archaeology of all time. It's like 60 million copies of it in multiple languages all over the planet, drawing on the themes that Blavatsky incorporated into her religion in the 1880s, filtered through the horror fiction of H.P. Lovecraft, and Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods is the basis on which the History Channel today has been feeding 12 seasons of ancient aliens theory to a whole generation of wide-eyed UFO believers. It's frightening how strong the links in this chain are. And what's even weirder from a Christian perspective is when you look at the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. Occult researcher Peter Levenda wrote a book a few years ago called The Dark Lord, in which he shows how Lovecraft and Aleister Crowley, who apparently weren't familiar with one another or one another's works, were actually writing things that were so similar that, in Levenda's opinion, they were essentially they were channeling the same entity, the same supernatural entity. Yeah. Now, couple that with the research of Jason Colavito, who is, to the best of my knowledge, an agnostic at best. He's not a Christian as far as I know. He's the one who shows how the work of Lovecraft inspired the modern ancient aliens theory. So when you put that together, you got the possibility that the modern ancient aliens theory, which is, like I said, running in its 12th season now on a major cable network here in the U.S., comes right out of channeled information that was fed to Helena Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley.
Well, and isn't it weird, not that, that I'm going to put us in the crosshairs for this, but you have an entire religion based on science fiction with L. Ron Hubbard's work. He's a self-proclaimed science fiction author who, to save himself some tax money and protect himself, created a religion based around this sci-fi belief. And there's, they say there's anywhere between 30,000 members nationwide to 15 million members worldwide, depending on what numbers you want to look at on that. But it's astounding that there are that many people, even if you found 30,000.
Yeah, but
that
Dave,
believe
think
that
about
there are aliens that are our place in the universe is somewhere else, and that they're coming back someday. It is bizarre.
Yeah, but when you think about it, Dave, the Church of Latter-day Saints is also premised on the existence of many occupied, inhabited worlds all over the universe. And what we're saying in the book, The Day the Earth Stands Still, is that the modern UFO phenomenon, whether people who are following it realize it or not, is itself a very loosely defined religion. I mean, what is a religion? It's a belief system that tries to answer the big questions of life. Where did we come from? Why are we here? And what happens when we die? And Josh can tell you, when we went down to Roswell for the 70th anniversary of the crash, the annual UFO festival this past July, We did not see MIT or Missouri University of Science and Technology or NASA or Rensselaer Polytechnic there trying to recruit the next generation of engineers, scientists, and astrophysicists. We didn't see that. We did, however, see a lot of tarot card booths, palm reading booths, and a lot of people who wanted to sell you healing crystals.
And don't forget a McDonald's in the shape of a UFO.
Yes.
Yes.
That's even affected the Church of Ronald McDonald. Eat of these chicken nuggets, for they are my flesh. It is horrifying. Yes, it is.
Probably true, though.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, and I'm often intrigued by the idea that you guys seem open to the idea of interdimensional, which, listen, that's a theoretic science as well. We have no conclusive proof that alternate or parallel universes exist.
Exactly.
It's guesswork, and some of the biggest scientists and biggest brains in the world believe it, but that doesn't make it so. Remember, some of the biggest scientists and biggest brains in the world believe we were the center of the universe and that the planets and the sun revolved around us. We're constantly evolving and learning. So to me, it's interesting that for some people, the idea that somebody or something from another planet could make its way here seems completely ludicrous, but that something from some sidestepped universe that's just a, jump to the left and then a step to the right, to quote Rocky Horror Picture Show, is a much more plausible idea. It's funny to me where people, what ideas they'll get behind and what they just don't see as a probability or possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, like we mentioned before, we do look at all possibilities. We do believe that the ET hypothesis is a possibility. We believe the interdimensional stuff is a possibility, but like you said, and I think you said it very well, that we're all just doing guesswork. I mean, if we're honest, we do that with our faith too. I can't prove scientifically to an atheist that God exists. So we're a lot of the book is just trying to show that that the ET question may not be as scientific and as provable as we might like to think it is. There is a lot of guesswork in all of it, and like Derek said, it's more akin to a religion than based in any kind of science, which is fine, because we're religious people too. But yeah, so I mean that's kind of the. I probably should mention too our website, officialdisclosure.com. If people go there, they can get our book with like a whole bunch of other stuff, like $300 worth of DVDs and books, all pertaining to this topic for only $39.99. I just realized that in the last interview Derek and I did, we forgot to mention that, so I want to make sure that your listeners can get the best deal possible.
We get talking about the topic and forget about it. But yeah, Josh is right. There's some stuff in there that we collected while we were down at Roswell that people really should take advantage of, because it's interviews with that have never been broadcast anywhere, not on Skywatch TV, not on podcasts, not anywhere else. Including a jaw-dropping interview with a multiple-time abductee named Joyce Ahrens, who was featured back in the 90s, as far back as the 90s, on a television program called Sightings. And I remembered seeing it back then and thinking, wow, this is really creepy, because she was very credible. We've had the opportunity to meet her, and she was gracious enough to grant us an interview, and that was incredible. The other one, the interview with Dr. Michael Heiser on the theological basis of how do Christians, or how should Christians respond if ET actually were to show up, is worth is worth the price of admission as well.
Do you guys think that we are on the cusp of disclosure? Do you believe that we are now closer than we've ever been?
Yeah, I think we're closer than we've ever been. I don't know when it might happen, if at all. But if it happened this year, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not necessarily expecting it to, but because there's a lot of things I think that would have to take place first. But if I didn't know for sure that this was going to already happen as fast as it has with these recent news reports and things. So if something did happen this year, wouldn't surprise me. I'm not saying it will, but I do think that of course, we are closer than we've ever been before to something like that.
Of course, the naysayers will just say that it's just a viral marketing campaign for the return of the X-Files.
Well,
right.
And that's a really good point. And I was going to bring that up, Dave, because I think that if anything is disclosed, it's going to be frustrating and unsatisfying to people who are looking for all the answers. It will be like trying to follow the myth arc inside the X-Files, which anyone who watched that series knows wound up contradicting itself on some really important points before the whole series was over. And I'm don't even talk about the reboot last year. That was horrible.
Hey, it starts again tonight, Derek.
I know. Yeah.
How dare you, sir? I enjoyed last season, and I will enjoy this season.
I did too, Dave.
Meet me at dawn on the battlefield, sir. For you've been smitten across the face with my glove. Is that the word? Smitten? Smoten? Smote?
Smited. Just remember, Dave, you're feverish and delusional.
Yes, well, there is that. There is that. My wife will be the first to tell you that.
We enjoyed the series too. Just the last episode, it was just so dissatisfying. But that is a metaphor for the entire UFO phenomenon, because the information that has been reported by contactees and abductees through various government investigations, like Project Blue Book, like this 5-year project that the DoD ran, winds up when you put it all together, you get a bunch of information, some of which is mutually contradictory. If this is true, then this can't be true. And if this is true, then this can't be true. Well, why is that? Well, because it isn't what we think it is. It isn't what true believers think it is. There is no one answer. Part of it is that some of the things that were reported were just misidentified natural phenomena. Other things that were reported were secret craft, and the government deliberately put out disinformation to cover it up. Other phenomena may be coming from outside of our dimension, but as we argue in the book, those entities don't have a vested interest in telling us the truth either. So I think ultimately what you get, even if full disclosure were to come out, would be a great big salad bowl filled with mutually contradictory lies and half-truths. It's not going to make anybody happy.
That's probably true, and probably why there hasn't been any official disclosure, because they feel like if we disclose this, they're not going to believe it anyway.
Right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go silent on you. I'm fighting a cough here, so I apologize. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us. We'll have a link up to your website, officialdisclosure.com. We'll have links up to your books and information. And thank you for joining us. We'll look forward to talking to you again. And as you continue this journey and more things start to unfold this year, I hope you'll decide to come back and visit with us and keep us updated.
Oh, absolutely. We'd love to. And we hope you feel better, Dave. Thank you for having us on.
It is my pleasure. Thank you, and thank you all. We'll be back tomorrow with more of the best in Paranormal Talk Radio. We're going down under, mate. We're going to talk about haunted Australia and the quarantine station, which I've had a chance to investigate, and we'll be back investigating this June. Make sure you tune in tomorrow and a brand new Theater of the Mind here on Beyond the Darkness.